Hey there everyone, my name is Ms. Bowman, and today we are going to be starting our lectures for educational psychology. I just want to start off by saying I'm super excited to teach this course because it's personally very fascinating for me, so I hope that I can share that love with you. So we are going to be talking about Chapter 1 today. But before we get into all of that, let's take a side note to talk about a few things in the course. So first of all, I would like to say thank you for your patience with me as I figure things out on Canvas, kind of figuring out the flow of how I would like this course to go. I have some recommended times for you, so recommended days, so like reading Monday, reading Tuesday, watch this video on Wednesday. Those are just recommendations. Obviously, the only things you have to do on a certain day are the assignments, so if they say due on them, but that is okay because I want you to have just a general structure that you can follow. Work at your own pace, but make sure that you don't get overly distracted. Don't fall behind in this course. This is an 8-week course, meaning that we gotta, go kind of fast, so please stay motivated. If you have any questions about the course, you know you can reach me via email, and I have an office in the math building if you'd like to come visit with me in person. I'd like to say I'm, pretty cool to talk to, but maybe not, I don't know. Anyways, so let's get to it. So educational psychology, we are very interested in taking the components of the research that we do in psychology and implementing that into how we teach children information. This is a huge area that is working, and so I hope that you enjoy getting to learn about how we're implementing the research with what we do in the classrooms. So I would like to let you know that I was raised by a mother who's a kindergarten teacher. So I was very immersed in hearing about her experiences teaching. So for example, she's taught for 33 years. And she now has her own way of how she thinks things should operate. Now, her issue is that sometimes she's like, well, the students really learn this information really well this way or that way or whatever. And sometimes the educational practices that are provided to her, the educational tools, don't always support what she knows really works with the students. So we'll kind of see a common theme here of separation between psychology's research and the education system, and hopefully as you go through the course you can see how much those need to be working together. What can we do to foster a relationship between the two? So let's get started. Now first we have teaching as evidence-based practice. So this is saying when we're teaching, we want to use research. We want to use evidence. I want to know that if I have my children do X, Y, and Z, that it's actually going to work and that there's actual research behind it, not just kind of guessing at what we think will work the best. So when we have evidence-based practice, that means that we have instructional methods based on research. So for example, let's say that I'm wanting to teach a child how to count. I'm asking them 2 plus 2. Well, generally this child will go 2 plus 2 equals 4, and they'll count it on their fingers. For a while, teachers were trying to say that you shouldn't be counting on your fingers because what that does is it spends more time on the process, right? Try to count in your head because that's what you'll be doing in the future. Don't use your fingers. Well, since then, researchers have come out and said, well, wait a minute, no, children need to count on their fingers because it helps form very important mental representations of what numbers are. It gives them a visual, it gives them a tactile to work with to implement their learning or to support their learning. So that's just a side note. I'll have a bunch of side note examples throughout the course because that's how I teach the best. But anyway, so when we can apply educational psychology to the classroom, we can enhance the nature of learning. We can say, we know this will work, we know this will help the students. We can also hopefully motivate the students to learn. Maybe we could find ways to help students learn boring subjects. Next, we can assess student progress. Assessment is very important. As you know, as a college student, you have exams. Clearly, exams are important. But whenever it comes to children, assessments are vital because those are what tell us whenever a student might need more assistance. If they were to have low scores, well, that means that they need potentially more support through their learning process. Then we have general developmental trends. That's really important to notice. And then we have individual diversity. So this one is focusing on, let's say we have a child who has dyslexia. That's an individual diversity that we as the educators need to focus on. So those are some reasons why we would want evidence-based practice. Now let's talk about some research. So this is understanding and interpreting research findings. There are two main classifications for research. There is quantitative information and there is qualitative information. So quantitative is numerical. There is a number associated with it. Think of quan, Q-U-A-N, for numerical. So this is test scores, attendance, and ratings. Whereas qualitative, Q-U-A-L, is non-numerical data. I like to think of the L as for language. So this is interview, observations, and case studies. Well, on that note, I'm going to take just a small break and introduce you to Caden Bowman. Caden, would you come around, please? Alrighty, so this is my son, Caden. Caden, how old are you?
8 years old. This year I'm turning 9.
9. What grade are you in?
3rd.
Yeah, you're in the 3rd grade. Do you like it?
Mm-hmm.
What's your favorite part?
Reading and math.
Okay, so he said reading and math. That would be a qualitative example. So that was a language-based response. Whereas, Caden, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you like math?
10.
10, 10 being the most, right? Okay, so that would be quantitative information. Caden, on a scale of 1 to 100, how much do you like reading?
100.
100, yeah. Reading's pretty cool. So do you have anything else that you'd like to tell my students about? Anything about school?
Not really.
Not really? Okay.
Sometimes when I read a book, I just get lost in the pages.
Yeah, that's understandable. My students can probably relate to getting lost in the pages with all the textbook pages, right? You think? Alrighty, well here, come here. Say bye.
Bye.
Alrighty, so that was Caden. Go sit. So, that's another layer of my interest with teaching this class is that I have my own child who's going through the process now. I love learning about what he's learning about. I love asking him if he likes school. I love being involved in that because your child's attitude about school is very important. Some of you in this class probably have children as well, or siblings, or nieces and nephews, and it's very interesting to hear the things that they say. Anyway, so that was an example of quantitative versus qualitative information. Let's look at quantitative a little bit more. So quantitative studies have several forms. So whenever we're doing studies, let's talk about how we can collect or classify that data. So descriptive information is about the population or a situation. It is descriptive. So Caden is 9 years old. That's a description of where he is growing up. Next, we have correlational research. So correlational research is whenever there is a relationship between two variables. So let's say we have age and we have reading ability. Caden's age is at 9, but his reading ability should be going up as his age is going up. So that would be a positive correlation. If you don't know what correlations are, you can shoot me an email. I'd be happy to post a video about correlations themselves. You might have seen these in your statistics class or your research class if you've had that yet, or even general psychology. Correlations are a powerful tool for understanding relationships between variables. Next, we have experimental studies. So these are looking for the causal links between two variables. So for example, can I manipulate one thing and get a different outcome? Most research studies are using experimental methods because they're wanting to see if what they're doing has an impact on the students. So let's say I decide to implement this new reading regime for my students, and I just know it's going to work. So I give half of the room this new and improved thing that I have to help their reading abilities, and the other half of the room does not get the thing. Now, what I can do is I can run a simple t-test and I can compare scores to see if my intervention that I had for the students actually helped their reading abilities or if it's just all in my head. So that's a basic example of experimental. We'll go through this one again in the future. Next, we have quasi-experimental. So these are things that are not necessarily all influential factors to be controlled. So sometimes it's like a partial experiment. Some things you can control and some things you can't. We'll review all of these, but now let's talk about for each one what a research question looks like. So for descriptive, the question would be, what kinds of aggressive behaviors occur in schools? So tell me what kind. So we got hitting, we got kicking, we got screaming. We have different types of aggressive behaviors. What are they? I'll list them to you. Whereas correlational question, it will ask, are students more likely to be aggressive at school if they often see violence at home or in their neighborhoods? So we have aggressive levels at school and aggressive levels at home. Is there a relationship between these two to indicate, oh man, you know what? Yeah, children seeing this at home definitely has an influence on what they do at school. Whereas experimental is which method is the most effective in reducing aggressive behaviors? What can we do to decrease the aggressive behaviors? We have rewarding appropriate behavior, we have punishing aggressive behavior, and we have a combination of both. What is going to work to get students to have a less aggressive behavior? Skinner would say that rewarding appropriate behavior based on operant conditioning would be the best, but that's, side information. So now let's look at qualitative studies. So what does it mean to be a qualitative study? Well, remember, qualitative L is language-based. So it's an in-depth look at certain characteristics or behaviors. So it's essentially descriptive, how things are. Can you describe them to me with language? So an example question is, what distinct qualities characterize high schools in which members of various adolescent gangs interact congenially and respectfully? So we're asking about the nature, we're asking for language-based information. Now let's go to mixed method studies. So the question is, do students show a decline in academic achievement in the 9th grade, their first year of high school? If so, why might this be so? So in their first year, do they show academic decline? Well, this is a combination of both quantitative and qualitative research. We're asking for a specific number. We're asking how much did they decline, and we're asking why. Why? The numbers aren't necessarily going to tell us, oh, that this is why, but perhaps we can notice trends between students. Perhaps it's puberty, perhaps it's transition, perhaps it's home life, perhaps it's this, that, or the other. Who knows? But the goal of mixed method studies is that they seek to understand how things are and why they might be that way. So that's what that is. It's seeking to understand how and why. Whereas experimental is more looking at how. Alrighty, so one of the main things about interpreting research, and if you've had your statistics course, you know this, but you have to be cautious. You have to consider all alternate explanations of the research. Don't draw conclusions only from experimental data. Draw only causal inferences from experimental data, but don't just draw random conclusions from things like correlations. If you've taken a statistics course, you know that correlation is not causation. It's just showing a relationship between two variables. One does not necessarily cause the other. Alrighty, so let's talk about the difference between principles and theories. So a principle or principles are generalizations that identify factors that affect learning or development and describe specific effects the factors have. So these are fairly stable over time. So principles, right, are these specific effects, right? They describe them. Whereas theories, on the other hand, are integrated set of concepts and principles that tells why a particular factor is important. These synthesize the research findings. So please make sure that you review the two. So principles are generalizations, whereas theories are concepts. So principles are over theories. Most of the time people are like, oh, I have a theory that women are worse drivers than men, or whatever it is. Is that really a theory, or is that a concept, or is that a hypothesis, right? What are we talking about here? So take some time to really separate or tease these two apart in your mind. Alrighty, so the last thing that I would like to say about theories is that the purpose of them, they propose an underlying mechanism to explain and predict phenomena. So having a specific theory that children learn better through X, Y, and Z is an example of trying to figure out the underlying mechanism. So they are continually expanded and modified, and they underline good classroom practices. So your theories as a teacher are super important, and they underline the classroom practices. One of my theories as a teacher is I like things to be as upfront as possible. I like for it to be clear for students to find the information. Hence why the homepage that you see is that chart. That chart or table is not very pretty, but it's easy to follow. It has the dates, it has the units, and it has what you're expected to do. And I feel like that's far simplistic compared to clicking around trying to figure out what all you got to be doing. Alrighty, so now let's talk about collecting data and drawing some conclusions. Let's say we are trying to assess student achievement. We're wanting to know why students have higher achievement. So collecting data about student learning will help us understand that achievement. Formal measures such as tests and quizzes are great measures to see how our students are achieving information. But then there are other informal measures such as comments, questions, body language, work habits, interactions, etc. Now, think about you in college. If you've ever had a class with me before, you know that this is how I operate. There's normally the formal measures, tests and quizzes. Those are to identify if you are actually learning or if you're achieving the knowledge. And then I'd like to do a thing where I just informally ask students, how did you like that? Is there anything I can do to support your learning? What is your experience? Give me some informal measures so that if my students are really hating my courses, I want to know so that I can try to implement some new knowledge, so that I can try to implement a new practice, try to make it more incentivizing, have more incentive. There we go. So, with that being said, if you don't like my course, let me know nicely, right? Don't send me the all caps letters in your email because that drives me nuts. Don't yell at me over email, but let me know. Most of the time your professors or teachers or educators will want to know how it's going. At least I do. So let's talk about some action research. So this is a systematic study in one's own school. So the goal is to take action. This is the most effective strategy in working with students. So taking action will be things like learning about your students individually, learning about your students in the classroom, learning about what they need to be doing, learning about their disabilities, learning about their experience. This is you going into your own school to learn about what's happening there. Now, that sometimes isn't necessarily experimental research. Sometimes it's just collecting information from your students, but that's okay too because you want to be actively involved in the learning process with your students. So the next slide we're going to look at it's talking about developing as a teacher. So let's talk about some of the principles that you can have to grow as a professional. So, number one, keep up to date on research findings and new innovations in education. You know, at some point you get kind of burnt out, you end up looking at Facebook, you end up seeing all these new findings. But I'm going to let you know right now, most of the time when people are saying, oh, I keep up with research, I'm like, sure. Sure you do. Most of the time people don't like reading research. It's boring to them. I'm going to say, and I'll bet some money, that if you're going to be an educator and you genuinely want your students to be better and learn more, it's not as boring as it could be. It's much more motivating to learn information, at least in my case for other people, to learn about the mechanics, to learn about this and that or the other so that I can share that with my students. Next is learn as much as you can about your particular subject. You want to know as much as you can. You'll never know everything, but I have to say that that's the main reason that I know that I like what I do, is because I want to learn more about it. I enjoy learning more about it. It's fun for me. Now, not everything is fun, right? Due dates, but I try to enjoy the topic. I like to know random fun facts. I like to incorporate just random pieces of knowledge that my students can listen to, that we can have fun with. So then it says learn as much as you can about specific strategy for teaching your particular subject matter. So as most of you know, I'm a psychology professor, and so the way that I teach my math course in statistics is going to be fundamentally different than how a math professor will teach statistics. So for me, what works in statistics is I provide a lot of examples of why we would care about the research. One of my big teaching philosophies is that a lot of information is lost due to the fact that students don't understand why what they're learning is important. So I always try to let students know this is important because X, Y, and Z. Why do you need to learn it? If you don't know why it's important, then you might not learn the information. Some of you are going to be plan on being educators, and when you get to the point, I would love to have a conversation with you. We could do some sort of interview if you'd like, but I hope that you find your own teaching philosophy, and I'm sure you will. Alrighty, so learn as much as you can about the cultures of the community that you're teaching. This one is huge. The culture at Tarleton is very different than the culture at another university. And so that's good for me to know and to experience and to understand so that I can relate to the students. For example, Caden, you saw him a moment ago. Caden's culture is actually quite different than the culture I was raised in. So you could tell that he was half Hispanic. And so learning about his culture would be really beneficial for his teacher to do as well. Learning about how he was raised, learning about his teacher. Guys, I'm going to let you know right now, if you become a grade school teacher, right, K through 12, you are very involved with the parents. It's like you're getting to know the student and the parents. It's a lot of people to keep up with. Real quick fun story about Miss Bowman. Whenever I was little, we would go into the grocery store, and my mom was a teacher, and so some of you can relate to this, and that every time we'd go into the store, we'd see one of her students, we'd see a colleague, we'd see somebody that she'd have to stop and talk to. And I'm like, yo, I get her like only in the evenings, right? So that's my mom. Anyways, so one day we were in the grocery store, and I had had enough apparently, and she was talking to this gentleman, and apparently I looked at him and said, my mom is a busy person, and we need to go home. She can talk to you at work tomorrow. Which was kind of cute, little me, letting this gentleman know that my mom needed to go home. The problem was that was her superintendent. So I basically told off the superintendent of the school. So, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. Anyways, we did go home. So let's talk about growing as a professional. So please, and this is you as a student, this is you as a future employee, please continue to reflect and examine your assumptions, inferences, and practices. You will want to continue examining these because you'll want to change your teaching modalities. I hope that you do. You'll find things that work, you'll find things that don't work, but if you're continuing to reflect, you can find ways to implement yourself and your knowledge better. Make sure that you communicate and collaborate with your colleagues. That's a huge one. And then believe that you can make a difference in students' lives. Teaching is difficult. Learning is difficult. This whole pursuit is difficult. It constantly takes me remembering that while I have one student that might be really upset with me about something, I have other students who are enjoying my classes and other students who are growing and really excited about the process. So for me, it takes a lot of counterbalancing. It takes a lot of, okay, this student over here might be upset that they didn't do well in the quiz, but this student over here is like, Miss Bowman, thank you for the challenge. Thank you for providing an educational challenge for me so that I can grow. So we're going to end off today with talking about strategies for studying and learning effectively. Our last slide. So, learning strategies. Relate what you read to your existing knowledge. Oh my gosh, always, right? There's no need to reinvent the wheel. Keep adding to what you already know. Actively consider and seek out new information that might contradict your existing beliefs. Many times we get very caught up with what we already believe that we don't take time to be like, oh, there's a different interpretation of that. Please consider all sides. Next, elaborate on what you read. Go beyond, add to it. This is a major learning principle with a lot of scientific research that I'm sure we'll talk about again. And then periodically check yourself to make sure that you remember and understand what you have read. So, for example, let's say you read the chapter before watching this video. Practically everything I said should be something that you can, except for like side stories, should be something that you're like, oh yeah, I read about that. I know that information. Unfortunately, learning is not just being exposed to something once and perfectly knowing it. Learning is a process, which is a whole class that you can take. But learning is a process where you have to go back and review what you've learned to make sure that you actually know the information or not. I wish that we were to the point where I could see something once and remember it, but that is not the case. That's not going to realistically happen. With that being said, I think that's all for today. Thank you for watching this video. Thanks for being in my course. Remember that you can reach out to me via email and that I'm here for you. And I will see you in the next video. Come around and say bye.
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 Can they actually see us on camera?